Hello everybody, this is Eric from Colorful Life. Today we are going to introduce a new way to remote access uh, our local device through our cloud. Remember that we have introduced a way to remotely access our Raspberry Pi in our home network through the so-called SSH reverse tunnel. But in this case, you will need to do a kind of complicated setting with the SSH, and you will also need to have some knowledge of the reverse SSH tunnel. For some of you might think it is kind of complicated to set it up, and you'll also need to set up the service to keep the reverse tunnel live, and it is difficult to make guarantee that the service of the reverse tunnel can be live forever, because it is the service created by ourselves. What if we can introduce some other service to make sure that we can do the tunnel much more robust? So that is where the Cloudflare comes into play. We also, in the previous video, we also introduced what is the Cloudflare, and then what Cloudflare can help us to protect our server. But there is another very good, very impressive service of Cloudflare called the Cloudflare Tunnel. It can accomplish quite the same application of the reverse SSH tunnel, and it's giving more robust and stable connection. So let's get into it. Okay, so now let's get into our Cloudflare service dashboard. If you don't have the Cloudflare account, you will need to sign it up for yours, and you will also need to register your DNS network for that. I'm using the Freenom DNS provider. You can select whatever the DNS server you want, and you will need to register it into the Cloudflare. Okay, so assume that you already have your domain which is managed by Cloudflare. You will need to get into the traffic section, and then you will see the Cloudflare tunnel under the traffic. Let's click on it, and then the next step, you will need to launch Zero Trust Dashboard. For me, I've already registered the Zero Trust service with the registration, But if you don't have, you will need to, of course, register the new team for the Cloud Zero Trust service. Okay, so once you get into the Cloud Zero Trust service, you will be able to see there is a access section under the dashboard, and the very last section is the tunnels. So let's get into the tunnels, and as you can see here, you don't have any tunnel here. So what is the tunnel means? As we just discussed before from previous the section of the reverse SSH tunnel section, we can make a tunnel between our local host with the our VPS, so that we don't need to have any public IP address to access our Raspberry Pi 4. So it is quite the same concept. We don't need to have any public IP address to access our Raspberry Pi 4 by using the Cloudflare Zero Trust. I mean the Cloudflare Tunnel service. So how does the Cloudflare approach this is using the kind of client daemon which is installed in our Raspberry Pi. Okay, so in this case we will need to create a tunnel inside our Raspberry Pi. It is also available to create a tunnel through the web page by this dashboard, but I found it much easier to handle it through the CLI tools inside the dashboard. So we can just check out the documentation here to see how does it work. Okay, so there is a very comprehensive documentation to guide us to set up the tunnel of the Cloudflare. So first stage is the set up a tunnel, right? And then we will need to use the CLI to set up the tunnel. And then as we mentioned that we need to install the client inside our remote client. In this case we are using Linux, right? And it's kind of easy that you just need to do this, copy, or you can get into the download page to find out your corresponding OS. So in this case we are using the just over here, right? We are using the ARM64 Debian. No, probably not here. This is due to the recent update of Cloudflare repository to the package Cloudflare. Okay, we probably need to get into here, and then you can see the Cloudflare package here. And as you might know, if you have the Ubuntu installed in the Raspberry Pi, in my case it is my Raspberry Pi has the Ubuntu 20.04 RPI4 LTS installed. I believe it is quite the same, so I try this up, and we just need to follow this step up, a step up to install it. So firstly, you will need to copy this and paste into your terminal, and followed by this one, and then you will be able to install the Cloudflare D. That's very easy. I have already done it in my local machine, and what you need to do is just follow this stage. If you have other Linux repository, and you just follow the this tutorial here, the steps here. Okay, so if you have successfully installed the, let's get into our local server. This is my Raspberry Pi. Okay, if you have already successfully installed the Cloudflare D, you will be able to check the version here, Cloudflare D version. Okay, and then as you can see, the Cloudflare D version 2022 has already installed in my local machine, I mean Raspberry Pi. Okay, so that is the first step. After installation, we just get into the documentation again. So let's get back. Where are we now? Just a second. Okay, once you have done the installation, you can do the create a terminal. Let's create a new terminal called the Ubuntu Pi, right? Okay, now as you can see, it shows created terminal Ubuntu UBPI with ID, this one. This is the UUID of the tunnel. Please make a note here, it is important. And you can see here the tunnel credentials written to the directory here. It's also important. Okay, let's get back here. Get back to our dashboard of Cloudflare, and then refresh it again, and then you will be able to see here we've already got new tunnels here, but it's already inactive. We will guide it through how to inactivate it. Okay, so the next one, just check into here, and then we will be able to see it from our terminal. Okay, the list, and then it's the same thing. We have a new terminal, and next step is, let's get into the terminal, the documentation again. Okay, before get into the config, okay, next step is we need to create a configuration file inside our Cloudflare directory, and let's do it. Cloudflare D, and okay, no, not yet. Cloudflare will okay, here I believe this is my UUID, and this one is the old one that I have done the test, so it is not, we are not going to use it anymore, so we can remove, we can delete it. Okay, we can also remove the my previous setting. Okay, no, we will just, okay, we can do the setting here. There is a config YAML. Okay, once we get into the config YAML, we don't need this one first. I will explain this one later on, but we just firstly delete all those things, and then we can start it from scratch. Okay, that's it. So as you can see in the documentation, we need to set up the tunnel and then credential file. That's important, right? And here, well, now we just get to here to see our UUID. As you can see, just a second, sorry. Okay, here the content of the tunnel is our tunnel UUID, right? Where to get the tunnel UUID, you can get into our dashboard again, and then you will be able to see a long string here. Oh, sorry. Long string here. This is our UUID, and let's replace this one. This is the one I used to test before. We don't need it anymore, and then we replace it with the new one. And then of course we need to replace this one as our new UUID directory, and then everything is done for now. And then we save it and then get out of the setting config file. And the next step, we again get back to our documentation and then see what to do next. Start routing the traffic. Okay, so we need to route the DNS to the new our service. Okay, so let's get back and copy this line here, and then here we are using our tunnel name, right? You can use our UUID or tunnel name. So our tunnel name is UBPI, and well, the next argument is our DNS. In this case, we just, for example, we use the name course. Okay, course dot ericlee.cf. Okay, and then as you can see, we added a CNAME of this domain, and then which will be routed to the tunnel of this UUID, which is what we created before. So once we get back to our dashboard, and then we can see our DNS setting, and then you will be able to see there is a new CNAME record is created automatically through our CLI. That's it. And then how do we know, even though we have already created the connection between this DNS to this tunnel, how can we know that the request is correctly routed to our service? What I'm saying service is the certain port inside our Raspberry Pi. How do we know that? So in this case, we will need to set up another config setting, which is called Ingress. So again, we go back to the configuration, and then to see where to set up the ingress rules. And then you can see here there is ingress rule, and then it shows that we need to set up the ingress rule under the second layer. Okay, let's just copy it here. Let's get back to our config file again. Config.yaml, and then set up the ingress rule, and as you might have already known, we set up our host name as course.ericlee.cf, and this is important, service. We will need to set up to which port or which service that the request will be routed. Okay, in this case, we will have the 80 port just for the example. Okay, just as an example service. Okay, so in this case, it means that if the request is sent to the course ericlee.cf, which will be routed to the localhost 80 port. Okay, that is what we need to do for now. Now we understand that where the request will be routed, and then the very next step is just start the tunnel. There is a command, Cloudflare tunnel run UBPI. This is the name of our tunnel. Well, there is a problem. Okay, this is also the very important concept. The Cloudflare restrict us to set the endpoint that when the request doesn't match any rule that we defined. So in this case, we will need to set up the status 404 to make sure that to let user to know there is not a valid URL they input. Okay, so in this case it will be like this. Service, okay, so this is the error handle case. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, now it is working fine for now, and once we get back to the dashboard and then refresh again, we will be able to see it is active. Okay, now let's try to see if it is working. Course start Henrik. Wow, is so I think this is the problem of the cache inside the Cloudflare, because I have already done several times inside the Cloudflare or using the same subdomain, so probably we need to change the domain to some other names. Let's try it to core only, and then we will need to do change the ingress setting to the core as well of the hostname. Okay, let's try it again if it is working. Okay, let's see. We change it to core. Oh, cool, this is working. As you can see now, it's welcome to Nginx. The reason why it shows the welcome to Nginx is because that I don't have the open service running in my the port 80 of the Raspberry Pi. So I just, if you also want to test, you can just install the Nginx inside your Ubuntu, and then you will be able to see the 80 port as Nginx service. Now it is working. So in this case, just a demo case, you can do whatever service you want just by routing the request to your port. In this case, it is 80 port of the Nginx, but if you have some other service running in your Raspberry Pi, for example the Docker or some other database like MongoDB or the SQL, and you will be able to do it in the same thing. Okay, so the next one I would like to demo to you is the remote access our Raspberry Pi through the SSH. How to do that? It is quite similar. We just cancel the service, cancel the daemon, and then we just try to add one more ingress service again, and this one will be, we will call it like SSH PISSH dot ericly, that's here, and service will be SSH and localhost 22, and I think it is all. And then we save it, and we also need to do the routing, right? So it will be Cloudflare Tunnel a route DNS and our tunnel name VPI and PI SSH cloud.ericlee.cf, and we go to our access setting dashboard to see. Oh no, we need to go here to see if the SSH record is set. Okay, as you can see, it is set here. And then after making sure, we just run the server again, run the daemon again on our Raspberry Pi, and then we can try if it is working, right? We open another terminal in our local machine and then try to access it. Well, Eric Lee Pi SSH ericlee.cf. Okay, now it's not working, as you can see, because we will need to do other setting under the inside the Cloudflare document. There is a connect through the Cloudflare access over SSH setting, and then you will be able to see how we can do the setting to access the SSH through the tunnel. And then this is quite at the same setting as we have done before, and then this is what we have done before. And then the most important part is that we need to install the Cloudflare D in our local machine as well. I have done this already, and then you will need to do it the same. And then we will also need to set up the SSH config. Let's try to do this. Okay, and we will need to set up the thing as it shows here. We just copy and paste it here. Okay, that's it. And then we will need to change it to our domain pi ssh ericlee.cf. I think that's it, and we save it, and then just go to check if we can make it work. I think that's all what we need to do, and let's try to run it again to see if we can make it work. SSH pi ssh ericlee.cf. Well, as you can see now, we can do it. And then we enter the password, and then cool, now we get into our Raspberry Pi service through our local machine and the SSH tunnel. That is pretty cool. And the next one is that let's get out of this. The final thing is that because we are now running this tunnel manually, right, under our terminal, but once we exit it, and then we will not be able to access it anymore, right, because the service is not running inside the Raspberry Pi here. So we want to create a service to let the tunnel always on inside our Raspberry Pi, and it is very easy. There is a document inside the Cloudflare as well. It's called Run as a Service on Linux, and then it shows that how we can do that. We need to install the Cloudflare. Let's do it. Okay, probably we need to do it in the route. Well, the reason, let's see, we probably need to run it in the raw root. Let's try SU, and then do it again. No. Okay, what we need to do is it show permission denied, meaning that we probably need to change the file authorization more open. So let's see. We don't have this. Okay, let's try. We might need to copy the same thing inside the route our config to our route config. Okay, let's check. Sudo nano config.yaml, and then we copy all this, and then we change it here. We also make it here. Okay, let's try it again. We might need to use the sudo. Okay, now let's see. Okay, now it's working. Install successfully, and let's see how. And then we can start the Cloudflare service, and then we need to give it authorization. Okay, and then we can see if our survey is working. Whoa, it is working as you can see here. And let's try to see if we can access it. Wow, it is working. Perfect. So now even though we don't have any, we don't need to manually config the, we don't need to manually turn on, enable or disable the Cloudflare tunnel, and then it will run it as a service on our Linux Ubuntu system as a daemon in the runtime. So we don't need to do any even after it reboot. Let's try to reboot it. And now we need to wait for a few minutes to let it to boot up again, and then let's see if we can access it again. So now because it is under rebooting, I believe that I cannot access it, but just after waiting for a while, might need to take a little bit time. Just give it a second. Well, let's try to see. Not yet, okay. It takes a little bit longer than I think, but it will be back soon. Okay, now as you can see, it is back, but I think the service is still running, but so it is taking time. Once the service is downloading, and it will be ready, as you can see here. Amazing, it is back in live. Perfect. So that's it for this video tutorial. I hope this is helpful for you. If it helps, please click like or subscribe. Thank you. I will see you next time.